Welcome to Embracing No Other. It's some time since I done an audio podcast, but I felt, you could say, an urge to share, to maybe highlight something that you may find very important in the current circumstances, and which is very pertinent in the life of any sadhaka or spiritual aspirant. And it's a delicate subject, and also one I've never fully tried to articulate, so it should be interesting and a challenge. And maybe it's a subject that is not pertinent to most people. So where to begin? You could say, if you scratch beneath the surface of human rationality and intellect or mind, that there can be a snarling beast. And what I mean by that is, underneath our capability as human intellect, our mind, we have a whole vital component to our humanity, our animality. And this isn't a bad thing. It's just, you could call it, it's a sphere of influence, and it's also part of our human nature. And it has some very fine qualities and very useful and necessary qualities, and also some aspects that aren't fully, you could say, in harmony, that speak of our evolutionary past. So our vital energy is a mixture of our drives, passions, our desires, and also some of the higher vital components of empathy, compassion, love, bonding. But then more towards, there can be also the urge to dominate, to win, to succeed at any cost. There can be fears, there can be cruelty, and there can be malice and tribalism. There can be the nearly kind of a perverted joy in domination, subjugation. And so it's a very complex area, but as we progress on the spiritual path, we often we find we can have deep spiritual experiences, yet something within us pulls us back to a more baser instinct and can pull us down, so to speak. Yet this vital energy is also it's a life force. It's what animates us, and it's such an important aspect of our life to really bring on board our spirituality. Because even the highest human capability of our reasonableness, our ability to discern and articulate and to communicate, can be hijacked by this vital energy, by our really unharmonized vital energy. So our fears, our passions, our desires can use our reason to justify its own desires or actions or wants or fears. And we can sound very reasonable, we can debate, justify, but behind it there's a very much so unrecognized vital claim that it wants something either for itself or a tribe or nation, and it can very much serve the what's often called the desire soul or the ego. So our ego can want something, say, I want this, and then it'll use the mind to justify why it's right to want this or why it should get this. So you can say your mind gets hijacked. And so it's very important to recognize when your mind gets hijacked by fears or desires or wants or allegiances to conditioned aspects of either heredity or tradition or nation or so that's just one aspect of it. Our vital energies and our mental energies, our mental consciousness, our nature as a human with a mental consciousness, and we also have a vital consciousness, these drives, passions, desires, emotions. And of course, different nation states have more propensity towards the vital energy or mental energy or a balance or a particular type of mental sphere of influence. And of course, as we mature, it changes. You know, as an adolescent, we very much come into our vital consciousness. We very much are driven by our vital wants and desires, and it's a natural process, very natural. We learn to temper it with some reason and restraint as we go, and it also we just find a balance. And we also find that, you know, we satisfy so many desires and that's fine, or we find that even satisfying desires, it's not all that. We tend to broaden out from our own egoic wants into a broader sphere of like what's good for those around me or the country or life or the world. We become more open. We widen out past our own selfishness. So then there's another really, we can very easily recognize, I suppose, that there is influences in the world. We can get very easily influenced. We can get influenced by people around us, their moods, their passions, their ideas. They can fire in us a certain momentum. They fire in us, oh yes, I agree with that, I'm in line with that, or I want that too. And that can go either way, so to speak. It can inspire one to greater heights, or it can pull one down into a baser mode, so to speak. And these influences can come through books, ideas, people. It can come through television, media. It can come through conditioning through our tradition, our religion, our culture, our family values even. That as a family we're for this, and it can be very noble values and morals, or a little bit baser. And when I use these terms, it's not to judge them. It's just to say, not that one's bad, or it's to really just highlight there's a kind of process of evolution as we evolve to more, we aspire to something greater, less selfish, more unifying as we grow and develop. Now, we all grow in different ways and speeds and times that suits our particular evolutionary potential. Because for me, I see it as we have many lives. As a soul, we come in again and again. So then these influences, and you could even feel it sometimes, you know, if you go into a room where there's someone you know and they're in a very bad mood, you can feel the vibration from them. The vibration is nearly like, whoa, it's too much. Or if someone is carrying a great anger towards us, an unspoken anger, you can nearly feel the vibration. So these are influences. So you could say they're kind of subtle influences. And the influences can be like when someone has great care or love or is thinking of you. You can feel that as you become more sensitive, as you become more attuned to the movements of energy in life, to the particular vibrations of consciousness. And so there are subtle influences of different degrees, you could say. And for most people that are mind dominated, they find it very difficult. They mightn't have an ability to sense what's more subtle. But that doesn't mean they're not influenced by it. They're just not aware that they're being influenced. So some people can be very easily manipulated or influenced or conditioned and not be really aware of it. And, as children we're heavily influenced and conditioned by what's happening around us and how we're taught and what we're brought into it. It takes us some years to really to individuate from that conditioning, maybe to break out and say, actually, no, I have a different idea about that, a different feeling. I want to go this way. So we start to say, hold on a second. So we go through a process of individuating. Now, some people can never break free of family conditioning or cultural or religious, and maybe they don't need to in this life. That's okay. But what I'm speaking to here is those of you who are interested in evolving to find really your potential in this life. And also, then there are forces in this world that are hostile. And I'm not just talking about hostile in terms of the physical aggression or control or domination through politics or finances. That's one level of it. There is that in the world. And there are quite hostile people, institutions, traditions, and even every country has its own level of hostility, a shadow aspect. But beneath even that material or physical hostility, there are subtle influences of hostility. You could say it's a mode or an energy that's anti-evolutionary, that very much is against the divine, against humanity lifting itself out of ignorance to evolve. So you could call them hostile forces or influences. So this can be a leap for a lot of people to really be open to explore this. Some people may be already familiar with it, because in a way every sadhaka or spiritual aspirant encounters these hostile forces, whether they're aware of it or not. It's often those energies that seek to derail us from our spiritual path, from our practice, or from our aspiration. It's the influences vital influences that come cloaked in the form of desires or thoughts that seek to derail us from that which we aspire for growth, to evolve. And the hostile forces can use many different guises, so to speak. They can even clothe themselves in spiritual experiences, and that we have a spiritual experience, an opening, and a suggestion come in that can inflate our ego, that we get a spiritual ego, that we think ourselves better than others. Or else it can be suggestions that come as feelings or thoughts that, we're not worthy for a spiritual path, or we don't have the ability, we're not cut out to this. Or the hostile influences can come in through the words or deeds of other people around us who seek to pull us down, to push us off balance, by not supporting, by mocking, belittling. And those people mightn't even be fully aware of what they're doing. So really, every human faces this challenge, is, do we give in to these hostile impulses or influences that affect our human nature? And many of us can look back in our lives and remember moments where some influence of maybe of cruelty or jealousy or condemnation really pulled us down, that it affected our nature, that we acted inappropriately or we affected another person. And afterwards you can go, what was that? Why was I like that? And you could say in that moment you're overtaken by a hostile influence, a lower vibration that seeks to disrupt and disharmonize. Or it can come in the form of, negative thoughts. It can cloak itself in a depressive atmosphere that derails us from our practice or isolates us from communication. So these hostile influences can affect our, our vital energies and our mental consciousness. And then really we have to question at any moment, what am I open to? What suggestions am I aligning myself with? What influences am I aligning myself with? Are they unifying or are they separating? Are they hostile or are they uplifting? Are they ego bolstering? Is there a quality of peace to them or a distasteful disharmony? We have to learn to recognize the quality of such vibrations, whether they're in the form of desires, fears, thoughts, and really to be able to reject them, not align with them, say no, this is no good. It's not for me. This is not what I sanction, this is not what I stand for. And to not let them have purchase in her, not to dwell on them, not to let them fester or propagate are spread. We can often very easily spread these influences through our words or energies or actions, and we pull others into that sphere. And these hostile influences or forces, they can, you could say, influence groups of people or collectives, or it can roll through a nation state, influencing it, or political parties, or a religious organisation. That's often when a religious institution can become corrupt or perverted. It falls into shadow. And you can see that some people have a very strong vital force to them. They have a strong vital influence, so they can be very convincing. They can gather a lot of people around them. You can see it in through politics or media or in the film industry. That some people have a vital, it's nearly a charm or energy that draws people towards them. Sometimes that influence is very beneficial, sometimes not. It can be an influence of hate. Someone with a strong vital energy can propagate hate. It's not very well known, but in the Second World War, Hitler was actually very open in certain regards. He had an opening in the vital domain, so to speak. It's often what are called channels or mediums. And he thought he was contacting an angelic being or supreme being. It had come to him in visions of splendid colours and light, and Hitler believed this was a divine being and it was there to guide him. And it gave him a huge vital influence, a power, so to speak, a conviction and a convincing quality that gathered a lot of people around him. So you could say he fell under the influence of hostile force, very hostile force that seek to dominate, control. And of course he thought he was doing it for good. That's always the catch, really. Even people who are in the grip of a hostile influence, that they believe they're doing good even though they can be committing atrocities. And Hitler managed to pervert and twist the nation to use its sense of national pride to pull people together to dominate. And national pride can be, a wonderful thing to feel a love for your country or beauty for your country, and to recognize its good qualities and to aspire to grow and to be better and to prosper. But then it can also go overboard, where it's like we need to grow at the cost of others. We are better, so we deserve. We're chosen ones. So it can very easily go overboard. So you could say, the consequences of that world war are still ricocheting today. That hostility had such an impact on the world, and it created such carnage, upset, death, destruction. The trauma was huge, and not all the trauma from that has been cleared. And the hostility that was behind all that movement of the Second World War, it hasn't gone away. It morphs, it changes. It tries to use any situation or opening to create more division, more hate, more strife. It's still at play in the world. And I suppose then that leaves open the question, how does it get in? It often gets in because we're not conscious, or because sometimes our own trauma or hurts leave a kind of opening within us to be influenced. So our unhealed or unacknowledged hurts, because often when one is traumatized, the hurt gets pushed down as a safety mechanism, because it's not the time to deal with it. We have to just keep going to survive. And the wounding can be an unconscious part of it, part of us. And anywhere that's not conscious and there's an opening or hurt, that hostile influence can still have a purchase or an in. And that goes for anyone in the world, because, there's a level of trauma in every country, in every age. And even like deep traumas on a specific culture or nation can roll along through generations. So, as I speak, you can probably see how that may be pertinent to current situations in the world, what's happening, the current strife, the current division, the current fear, the current hostile influence that is debated and rationalized. But yet, it is hostile. There's a force at play that's dragging people into cruelty, the division, and it wants to amplify. It wants to cause as much division as possible to delay the evolution of humanity. Yet within every challenge there's also an opportunity for growth. And how each of us comport ourselves, how conscious we are of what's happening, will determine the outcome. It will have a heavy influence on the outcome if each and every one of us does not get sidetracked or derailed or pulled away from our own, you could say, moral compass, our own sense of connection to the divine. Not to get pulled away, and to see things from a broader, deeper perspective, not to get polarized. This doesn't mean you can't see from a particular standpoint that something is not acceptable, certain behavior is not acceptable, but you also look from a broader perspective that even those that are committing atrocities are under a hostile influence or traumatized themselves in some way. And we ourselves, we can fall into hate or condemnation in the deepest aspect of seeing someone or some group as inhuman or somehow less. So we continually have to refer back to ourselves. What is my state of consciousness in this moment? So even if you're engaged in activism or speaking out or following current events, that you don't lose your center, so to speak, that you can remain present, conscious, connected to your soul or spirit if possible. Really, our greatest security lies in contact with the divine. If we are in touch with our own soul, it gives us a sense of what is good, true and beautiful, and the right way to engage with any event or person. Or if we're connected to that descending force of Shakti, it brings with a sense of peace that really stabilizes us and sustains us and nourishes us no matter the outer circumstances. Now, that's an easy thing to say because sometimes the outer circumstances are quite challenging depending on where you are and what's occurring around you. But even if you lose that connection, it is always important to reconnect. Because, this clash of forces, these anti-divine forces and the divine that we're growing into and that which is shaping us, really the crux of it lies in every human. You could say the war is not in a distant land always, it's right here daily. The challenge is, do we give ourselves to anti-divine forces, hostile forces, or are we open to the divine in any moment? And when we're open to the divine, we can be more effective in what we do and how we can change or help any situation. Because bringing disharmony to an event that's already disharmonious just creates more disharmony. So we have to find our own harmony, our own peace and security and trust in the divine, a deep faith, our deep connection that allows us to really have a beneficial influence and effect in the world. It's not that we detach from things, we see it as illusory. is that very much we see that there's a clash of forces, and we know what we give ourselves to in any moment, in any day. And it doesn't mean that every moment we're perfect, so to speak. We all fall down, but it's how we reorientate and reconnect. The divine never turns us away, ever, 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 ever. No matter what we fall into, we can always turn back. That has been a great solace to me in my life. And a great strength. And more I feel it. More and more I seek to embody it. And you could say it's an infinite evolution. We're always growing into self-perfection, growing in the image of the divine, the way of the divine, recognizing our own divinity and divinity of others around us, regardless of their ways, paths, traditions, religions. Each religion is just one approach to the divine. They become somewhat problematic when we say it's the only way to the divine, or we dismiss other people's approaches to the divine. Religions are like stepping stones, and maybe after a time they won't be needed so much because people will have their own direct connection, their own direct realization that they are divine, that all is divine. And then the hostile forces will have no more purchase or influence. So there's so much we can do, because sometimes we look at events and feel powerless, but there's a huge amount we can do, and it's so important that we actually do it. And it's an internal turning to the divine, and that reconnection, the yoga, that union with the divine, and that allows for a clear influence and activity in the world. So we're not powerless, and collectively as we start to turn, it will have an influence. And this notion of hostile influence and forces that can infiltrate, our own humanness and really lead us into an unhealthy way. It can also infiltrate political parties, also companies, also media. And I think media is the big one. That media is really, there's so much falsehood to it, so much lies, so much propaganda, and it can saturate us and confuse us and divide us and leave us to continually trying to churn in the mind what's true, what's false, who's right, who's wrong, is that correct, is this correct? And yet a certain media, element of the media, it's necessary to what's actually happening in the world. But always, always we must come back to the truth in our own heart of what do I stand for. So I treat the media a bit like excuse me, a bit like fast food. It can give you indigestion. It's not very nutritious, so it needs to be moderated, so to speak. So another huge component to really overcoming these hostile forces is to make conscious all aspects of our being. And a big part of that is overcoming any trauma. And we all have some level of trauma as we go through life. But it's really bringing ourselves back to harmony. And that's another huge topic. I might do a podcast specifically on that. Because there are a lot of techniques and fine techniques to help with trauma, but there's also a spiritual element to it that's very important to recognize and apply, and that will bring deep healing. So I think that's a good place to leave it. I hope it gives you kind of just an idea of hostile forces and how they can influence us, collectives, nations. And what's often really staggering, really, you could say, is that often the victim can become the perpetrator. And if we look at that, when we're deeply traumatized or hurt, and it can leave an area in us, an opening, that then leaves us open to hostile influences. And if, because of our trauma, we're in a fight or flight state, or fearful, or seeking to protect or secure, we can very easily fall under influences, and vital fears or cruelties or pride or need for security can override our reason and blind us. And again, it's often seen in many facets of trauma, from violence to sexual predation to just even emotional manipulation, that what we have fallen prey to, we often repeat in some form or another, and often we're not conscious of it. It takes great courage and skill to really face all these aspects, and there's a timing too. Sometimes we have to feel safe enough to actually to open up to our traumas. And if you don't feel safe, it's very hard to really tackle them. So if we're constantly looking for safety and not finding it, we are stuck in patterns of fight or flight. And in fight or flight, we're not at our best, so to speak. We're surviving, and maybe in certain levels doing well, but there's a price to pay, so to speak. We're not in parasympathetic, we're not in rest digest, we can't really communicate, have deep empathy, understanding. And that can lead to all kinds of trouble. So there is a wave of, another kind of wave at the moment of hostile force moving through the earth. And each one of us can make sure we don't get pulled astray by it. And always see things from a deeper perspective. And understand and have compassion, and also be willing to stand up for what's needed. I think it was Mother Mira, I'm not sure, it's many years since I read it. Someone asked her, like, if a murderer came to her for help to sit with her, would she? And she said yes, of course. Because she said, I wouldn't see just the murderer that's there before me, or the criminal, or the wrongdoer. I'd see all the people that came before him that influenced him. So there's so many things that go into shaping a particular person, or culture, or nation, or tribe. And it goes back and back and back, a lineage. So where do you point the finger? So again, if we as collective humanity, as the one self radiating as many souls, can recognize our own divinity, align with that divinity and the evolutionary aspiration to grow and to help each other, and to let go of the old hurts and traumas and blames, then we're aligning ourselves with a divine influence and can transform, and then there's no hostile force that can touch us. I wish you well.